on this episode of Spirit Talk.
And he invited me up to the White House the next week to bring all the materials I could that I thought were relevant. And I brought these books up, and we met in his office, and I've got a letter to prove it. He said, Jim, they want me to sign off $50 billion in black projects for Area 51. And if you were me, what would you do? And I said, Senator, I said, I want to know what the taxpayers' money was for on something like that. And he says, they won't tell me. And he had a note taker there taking notes. And then I gave him the books I brought. And one of them was Matrix 2 by Val Valerian.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Thank you for joining us on Spirit Talk. This is Chris Fleming. And, guys, I decided to change up how I present the podcast now. Instead of doing a month in the year, I'm just going to do an episode number. This is going to be episode number 127, since I've done 126 podcasts up until now. On this episode, we're going to go back and talk to Jim a little bit more about some aliens, UFOs, encounters, and some of the top secret information as well as public information regarding this incredible phenomenon. Hey, Jim, welcome back.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. I appreciate that.
You're so welcome. And I listened to our podcast that we had done a couple months ago. It was for November 2021. So anyone listening, if you haven't listened to it, go back to Spirit Talk November 2021. And you're in for a buffet dinner when you listen to all the information that Jim was sharing with us regarding stuff that he knows and people he's spoken to. What I like to do is take off from there. And the one thing I recognize, because I actually listened back to that podcast, is I know, Jim, you've been a pilot and you've had your own encounters. And you did mention that you had an encounter, but we didn't go into detail. So can you share with us your first UFO encounter and as well as any others?
Yeah, I was on a 737. We were flying from, it was 1995, February, flying from North Carolina to Los Angeles. We were about 100 miles past Albuquerque. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon. And it was talk about synchronicity. My co-pilot was a military tanker DC-10 pilot in the Guard. And I just happened to hand him this kind of a briefing statement. It was about 3 pages long, condensed, written by Michael Lindemann. He used to be a well-known researcher in the 90s. And so anyway, he took the time to read it, and he threw it back at me. And he says, I've been flying 20 years, and I don't believe in this stuff. I've never seen anything. And I mean, his lips had barely stopped moving. And I'm looking off to my left, and here's this dark, it looked like a dark shadow coming, and then it looked like it was right on top of us. And then all of a sudden it was bluish green, oval shape, really moving pretty fast, but not like super fast, because I was doing about 550 over the ground. And I thought it was going to hit us, and we had no warning from our warning system that there was a pending encounter, a possible crash where you'd have to take evasive action. And I'm like, what's going on here? And then as it got closer, I saw how big it was. And it was definitely about the size of a football field, that made our 737 look like a toy, and bluish green. And his face was, I wish I had a picture of it, because the whole cockpit, everybody in the back, I mean, literally everybody was watching a movie. So not even the flight attendants saw it. So it was only he and I. And the cockpit was kind of having this greenish blue glow to it as this thing was going by. And so then we talked to air traffic control. They didn't have anything. So then they called military air traffic control if any military ops were in the area, and they said no. And then they asked it was like a scene from Close Encounters where that air traffic controller, anybody want to report it?
Right.
Because there was United, TWA, and Northwest. And they said, yeah, we see it. Looks like a meteorite. And I'm like, and then as they're talking, this thing's going horizontal right by us, and then shot up at about a 45-degree angle. It wasn't 90 degrees like other people say, but so then I chimed in. So when does a meteorite go back up? And
wow.
So they, so that was the first time I had anything like that. The co-pilot would never fly with me again, and of course nobody wanted to report it, just like that scene from that movie. So then years later, I was flying from Seattle in the middle of the night back to North Carolina, and we're at about 35,000 feet, and I'm seeing these three really bright orbs or spheres up ahead. And so, of course, I asked air traffic control, "You have anything up ahead of us?" And they said, "No, we don't have anything." And we flew by, and they were just like stationary as we flew by these three glowing, very bright orbs. They're like, they were perfectly round. And then they just slowly turned to the left in formation and slowly went away. And I'm a helicopter instructor. I mean, helicopters can't hover at that altitude anyway, but
right.
they definitely weren't helicopters. So literally a week later, I'm over Georgia late at night, and here's these things again. A week later, I couldn't believe it.
Oh my God.
And the co-pilot, he didn't want to report it, never wanted to fly with me again, that type of thing. So that, as far as my personal encounters, as far as sightings, that's kind of a standard pilot sighting. I mean, there's so many through the years,
right.
But as far as me personally, that's what I've seen as far as in the air. I've had some other strange situations on the ground, which we might have time to get into, but that wraps up that thing.
See, I find it fascinating when pilots share their stories of what they see, because they're up in the air all the time. And, there's recordings out there of certain airlines reporting in these unidentified craft, whether it's commercial airlines or actual military airlines. There's recordings of them out there discussing this stuff. And I know, there's a mutual friend of ours that has on a couple occasions seen stuff too, because I know my phone is blown up at times, like, "You're not going to believe what I just saw." And, a real dark video of a triangle ship as he's flying by, and this thing, him and the co-pilot are witnessing this thing rotating, and he's trying to film it on his phone. I mean, you see the little dots of all three corners, but it's difficult because it's far away and it's dark. But he swears, the thing was about a football field or so long, and it was a triangle craft, and it was rotating, like it was flipping over while they were flying underneath it or right near it. So, I mean, that's fascinating. But I think one of the other ones fascinating, he'd shared a story that they were flying and they saw something take off real quick, startled them, and then they heard over the radio that I guess some FedEx plane or someone had called in control tower saying that something was shooting up at an angle that almost hit them, and it was massive. And they said, "What the heck was that?" And control, I think, did get it on radar, if I remember correctly. And they were going back and forth, and then they told them to go to a different channel because all the other pilots that are flying in the area were listening in.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
Well, the many, many times throughout my many years of research, it's a tough field for a pilot. It's definitely a professional pilot or military. The military pilots were very restricted, and it's only been in the last 12 months, basically, that they've been now given the clearance, including through the FAA and the military, Navy, Air Force, Marines, you name it. They've encouraged them to report their sightings. This is unprecedented because they were very restricted before, but we'll get into that. But it's things have opened up to a point, so that's a good thing. But throughout the years, pilots would come to me and, "Hey, can I talk to you privately?" And because they knew about my TV show or my research, and so they would talk about the things they'd seen out in the ocean or in the air in the Caribbean or isolated areas. But they were very concerned to keep their respectability in a profession that requires it, and I understand that. But it's just sad that it's professional pilots, military or commercial, have had to be kind of pigeonholed in this thing when they know what they saw.
Right. I remember years ago, my stepdad told me, 2 stories, which if I have time, I might play the interviews later at the end of the podcast. But he was a pilot for 30 years for TWA, and they saw something, and, the control center says, well, do you want to file this report when you get in? And they looked at each other and said, no, they want to go home.
Right.
After work, they've been flying so long, last thing they want to do is be in there for hours and get interrogated and stuff like that. And, but then he spoke about the reconnaissance missions when he was in the Air Force at Albuquerque, chasing away the Foo Fighters, and maybe we'll play that at the end. So it's just interesting how, I've seen him, this and that, but it's such a big story because this has to do with, most likely, I firmly believe, and I'm sure you do too, that it's aliens. It's other beings out there that has this technology and these avenues of flying throughout our solar system as well as on our planet. So what do you think? Because we've got UFOs and you got USOs, unidentified submerged objects too. And that's been popping up a lot, pun intended, as well, where you've seen certain photographs of craft going into the ocean or coming out, personnel that were on naval crafts talking about these things hovering or going back into the water. I just listened to a recording about a month or two ago of some military that were tracking this UFO flying over the ocean near the air carrier, and then they all freaked out when it submerged. And it's incredible. They're like, oh my God, look at this. They're watching it on the screen and the radar, and then all of a sudden, boom, it goes underwater. And how this got leaked and everything, I don't know, but it's like, I think we're going to see more stuff get leaked.
Well, actually, it was the heyday for this stuff was the late 80s and definitely the entire decade of the 90s for the popularity of this subject of ufology and extraterrestrials. And some Navy people did come forward with when they were out on their ships and these craft came out of the water. And the one guy that became a well-known speaker until he was, in my opinion, murdered was Bill Cooper.
Yeah.
And he wrote the book, Behold the Pale Horse, is a very interesting book. I met Bill a few times.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. And what else do you think about his story? It was remarkable.
Oh, yeah. I met Bill quite a few times. And very interesting book, no question about it. And unfortunately, he got in a little too deep on some other stuff, not so much the UFO thing, but and as far as I understand, yeah. And so it's a sad situation on that. But Bill, put his his beliefs ahead of the security of his family. He did get his family out of there before the government came and shot him. So what I could do, I was just before we got on the line, I was going through kind of a short, kind of a basic timeline where this all in modern times till the present of what's been going on, and kind of a short outline, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
So it definitely, the subject of the Foo Fighters definitely started things rolling in the 40s, and then you had the Kenneth Arnold first sighting, and he termed the craft flying saucers in June 24th of 1947, and then you got the Roswell incident July 3rd, and was reported by the rancher to the radio station in July 8th. So then Fate magazine, which is the oldest metaphysical magazine still being published, reported the case in 1948. And then also after that, True magazine had many articles on the UFO subject. And then on the scene came Major Donald Kehoe, and he wrote his first book, 1950, called Flying Saucers Are Real. He later formed NICAP, the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena. The first book he wrote was called We, and that was he was good friends with Charles Lindbergh, even though Lindbergh didn't believe in the subject. And then 1951, things started in the media world, and then and out to the main populace. That excellent movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Mm-hmm.
And then, based on one of Kehoe's book, after that came an interesting movie called Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And the same year, another lesser-known movie. These were all in black and white, but excellent, called Man from Venus. And what this entity had to say was very profound, same as Day the Earth Stood Still. And then in 1948, the Air Force, after what happened at Roswell, from 52 to 69, they formed Project Blue Book. It was originally called Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and then in 51 they changed it to Blue Book. And so that a lot of the main cases that couldn't be explained were debunked every which way possible. And then from NICAP being formed by Kehoe, we had APRO, Association of Phenomena Research Organization, and then the British UFO Research Association. So then early in the 60s, September 19th, 1961, you have the Betty and Barney Hill case, the first one reported of an abduction by aliens. Mm-hmm. Then you have the Gerald Ford congressional hearings based on the happenings that were going on in Michigan and those big cases that month in Michigan that activated Gerald Ford into getting those hearings done.
Wow.
So then you've got the Condon report that was done by the University of Colorado by Professor Condon and debunked everything in 1969, which caused NICAP to collapse. But a year later, the MUFON was formed, a Mutual UFO Network, and it's still going today.
Right.
So things kind of simmered down there till about 1975. Travis Walton was abducted for 5 days and later made into a major motion picture. And then 1978, Barry Goldwater heard rumors from a professor down in Florida that he had gotten proof there were ETs being held in Wright Pat in underground chambers. So, but by the time Goldwater got access to go there, all they showed was these gigantic empty rooms with huge air conditioning units, but everything else had been removed by the time he got clearance to get in there.
Oh, my God.
So then 1977, Jesse Marcel pops into a TV station in Mississippi, tells what he knows because he's dying of cancer. And he said, mankind has a right to know. So the station called nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman to fly down to interview him. And so that's where the whole Roswell thing started, was Jesse coming in there and talking about what he knew and how it wasn't a weather balloon. So then in 1978, you have that amazing pilot case in Australia. The pilot flying a Cessna 182 and disappeared. The thing just took him up and away. And I actually flew down. I was giving a lecture in Melbourne and met with his parents and tried to tell him what I knew on the case, because they were still upset years later. This would have been 1997 when I talked to him. Mm-hmm. So then you have Bill English. He was the first and really only NSA agent to come forward, National Security Agency, and he was a major consultant for the APRO group, and later gave many weeks of debriefings to John Lear, whose dad invented the Learjet, the autopilot, the car stereo, and many other things. Wow. And John, when he was a kid, used to hear his dad talking to General Jimmy Doolittle at their house about flying saucers. He thought they were just talking science fiction or something. However, later, before Jimmy died, he told John told me that Jimmy said, "Oh, before I die, I have some documents that will prove what you've been talking about to everybody, and they'll be in a vault." And Jimmy died. I have no idea if John ever got those documents, but he's never come forward with them that I'm aware of.
Wow.
So then John had flown different companies, a lot of them CIA related maybe, but so he's down at a bar in Asia, and he's talking to an old buddy of his that they'd flown together, and they brought up this subject of Bentwaters. And he said, I thought that was just a joke. They said, no, Bentwaters happened. Bentwaters Air Base in Britain, where the craft came down 3 days in a row, and all kinds of proof of that. In fact, there's still another movie coming out based on that. And CNN did like 2 1-hour specials on the Bentwater case.
So what happened at the Bentwater? Is that the one? Did they film it, or was there interaction between our military and the aliens?
There was never any. The craft was there. It would come down in this forest area.
Okay.
And there were three main military personnel.
I remember this
there.
one. Oh yeah. That was incredible because he recorded it on an audio, him interacting with it. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah.
But what they don't know, and I've met some of the players, and obviously the book called Left at Eastgate was written by one of the witnesses. But later, after the book came out, they've never put it out in print or anything like that. And they never basically talked to anybody when they were interviewed. But one of the personnel, he was having mental telepathy going on with some entities from inside the craft.
Wow. Okay.
But it's never been published. So this is where the stuff got kind of deep here in the late 80s, is where John Lear gets confirmation from his buddies that Bentwaters actually happened. So then Lear got interested in the subject, called in all kinds of connections, because Lear knew everybody through his father and his exploits himself. He's still alive, but he lives out west. But he's one heck of an aviator, I'll tell you that. I've met him many times, and he knows his stuff. So John Lear gets briefed by Bill English in the late 80s, finally tracked him down. And then from an odd meeting, Lear meets this guy to appraise his house. And he says, oh, you'd be interested in my neighbor. He just told me this far-fetched story, and he works out at this secret base. And Lear's ears perked up, said, really? And the guy he says, yeah, I'll introduce you to him. And it was Bob Lazar, the scientist who broke the whole story about Area 51. And that's how John Lear got connected with Bob Lazar. Then John Lear talked George Knapp at Channel 8, the CBS affiliate in Las Vegas, to interview him with his face blacked out and voice changed and like that. And, the phones just rang off the hook. And that became just a worldwide story. And that's how the world found out about 51 and Bob Lazar and that type of thing. So then, right after Lazar's going on TV, and then he got warnings on his voice recordings at home, don't ever do that again. They let him know that he was in danger, because Lazar and Lear had gone out into where they tested these things in the middle of the night, and Lazar knew exactly what time they were going to be doing these testing of the craft. And so that's, at Area 51, it's on an Indian reservation, just like all these secret bases are. So you're not under the Constitution. They have the right to detain you without legal representation. That's what happened. So that's how they got caught. And so Lear, they were in interrogation for like 24 hours on the whole thing. So then the same year, they had a live broadcast, a 1-hour special called UFO Cover Up Live.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was very unique, but it was sponsored, of all things, by Kodak Television. They only put out a few VHS tapes of it. It's hard to get, but it was a very interesting show. So then we got the things are really starting to heat up here in the late 80s after all this is happening. Then Bill Cooper comes out public with at the Gulf Breeze Conference. That's where he started talking. Then he put out the book, Behold a Pale Horse. And meantime, you've got another interesting individual who had also been briefed by Bill English. Bill and I got to know each other quite well. And he was a very interesting guy. I have the only videotape of him where he confessed that we're being visited, and he talked about what he'd seen in the Yellow Jacket, which is also the book that Sergeant Major Bob Dean talked about in the assessment for NATO of what their 3-year study had concluded, that we were being visited. They were trying to find out if they were a threat and all that. So Val Valerian, his real name was John Grace. He was an Air Force intelligence guy, and he became friends with John Lear. And then he changed his name to Val Valerian and wrote a book based on what's in the Yellow Book, the briefing document that these people that work on these projects get to see it. You got to have a high level clearance to get to see it. But they only originally published 1,000 copies. Now I understand you can get a duplicate off Amazon or something, but that's Matrix 1. And then Matrix 2 was much thicker and much more detailed. And then he had Matrix 3. And he went all the way through to Matrix 7. It was gotten to be so thick, I just couldn't maintain all the information. But that all, so these are the key players of what happened here. And then you've got Peter Davenport, who, of all things, runs the UFO hotline. He's ex-NSA Russian speaking analyst.
Yeah, I used to hear him on Art Bell all the time.
Yeah. And Art Bell, he was the main player that got all this out on the Coast to Coast radio, which is George Norrie's been doing it for many years now. So then we move into early 90, like about 91, and a show comes out by Linda Moulton Howe called, and she had made her name writing a book on the mutilations of this
cattle.
Snippy the horse in Colorado, and then later cattle mutilations in Colorado. And so she pitched a show to Fox, and she created the show Sightings. And later Sightings was taken off the air and then replaced with X-Files by Chris Carter, who was an editor for Surfer magazine. So where did Carter get all this intel to produce a very interesting show called X-Files, which at its highest popularity around the world was seen by 1 billion people a week.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I should say a month by satellite feed. So I'd go to Burma and different unusual places, and these kids are wearing X-Files t-shirts and all that stuff. It was just incredibly popular. So then you got the 1997 comes the 50th anniversary of Roswell. All the media was there. And so I show up, and a book had just come out that day, and the author's there to present it to the press, and it was called The Day After Roswell by Colonel Corso.
Right.
And he was given the debris from the Roswell crash to put it out to major corporations and like Bell Labs and DuPont, to let their scientists take credit for what the technology they had from the Roswell debris. So that things kind of moved along in the 90s after that. And then a show that I kind of worked on a bit. Unfortunately, it was not quite as I wanted to come out, but the producer, he was after a different storyline, but I did consult on it called Alien Autopsy. Mm-hmm. And that is not the real autopsy film. Right. The real one, how that came about, that show was three people got involved in it.
Ray Santilli, yeah.
Well, no, that Ray's later. He handed over that film.
Oh.
No, this the real. Somebody saw the real film. They were involved in it, and they knew they couldn't get it out. So he told his two friends. One of them was a medical doctor, and they agreed mankind has a right to know. So they reproduced as best they could what this individual had seen in the real alien autopsy footage. So that's how that all went down. And
let me ask you about that, because back in 2017, a friend of mine, Gail Porter, I went and met her in Soho to have lunch. And she says, "Oh, you're going to meet a friend of mine. He's a producer, and his wife or girlfriend, whoever it was. We're going to sit down." And so we're sitting down, we're having lunch, and I'm looking at this man, we're talking, and I said, "So what do you do?" He says, "Oh, you're in the paranormal." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, I've always had a fascination about aliens, UFOs." And he says, "Well, I was the one that helped do the alien autopsy." I said, "Oh, what's your name?" And he tells me his name, and I knew his name. Ray Santilli. It was Ray Santilli.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there, and I go, "Oh my God, I'm having lunch with Ray Santilli." And so we talked, and this is what he said, and I want your opinion on this, is he said that the original film that they had, and he was telling me about how they marketed it and they pitched it and they got the funding and investments. And then when they were ready to, start copying the film, whatever, I guess the oxygen, as it hit the container, because it had been open and all these years had passed, had somewhat destroyed the film to where the film was not playable. And he said, so from there, whatever other details, he says, I don't remember at this moment, they had to go ahead and do like a reenactment to fulfill the film or the investments or whatever, because they felt it was important getting out there. But he says that he still has the original footage and the bits and pieces, and that believes that we have the technology where we could put the whole film together. All the different, because it's when you take a look at the old real film, it was breaking up into pieces, but now it could all be scanned in and it can become a film, I guess. I can't remember the details, but I sat there going, "Oh my God!" So, what is your opinion of him and the actual film decaying or whatever, being affected by time and the weather?
That's a nice story, but if you know my sources, you'd know I was telling the truth. I've never met Ray, but the guy that I worked with on the show is he's always back and forth talking with Ray, staying in touch with him. And he is the one that got to produce the show and got the funding for the show and negotiated the deal with Ray. So as far as, the show, the Alien Autopsy, once again, it was seen by over 1 billion people worldwide, but it had huge ratings and all that stuff. But
yeah, it was on Fox. I remember, right? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. And my friend did several shows for Fox and NBC and also, Discovery and things like that. So, but it gets down to, do you want the truth or do you want just a lot of good ratings? And it came down to ratings. Right.
So was that Robert Kiviat Productions that did that? Were you involved? Yep. Yeah. Okay. Because I had a conversation with actually Robert back in 99, 2000, when they were doing was it World's Scariest Ghost Caught on Tape or something like that?
Right.
Yeah. And he reached out to me and we talked about some stuff, and he wanted to see if I had anything. And then he wanted me to kind of watch and take a look at some stuff, but we never got that far. So I'm familiar with, the work he's done. And I actually forgot the name of the actual representative that was at Fox, head of development, that actually commissioned that show. I actually met him years ago. He went on to some other network or production, but he used to wear like a cowboy hat and everything. He used to kind of dress real trendy and stuff. I forgot his name, but
yeah, I've been worked with Bob on a few projects. He's definitely dedicated to the subject, and he does a good product. Do I agree with everything that he's produced? I'd have to say no. But we've stayed friends for like 35 years. And the show that I was really upset with him on was the debunking the Billy Myers episode he did, and because I met with Billy for 3 days on his farm in Switzerland, and I asked Bob not to do that show, and I asked this other magazine owner from Brazil of this subject, and I begged him not to do the story on Billy. I said, I think there's some embellishment going on, but he also definitely had some kind of experience, and don't disgrace this person. And that's exactly what both of these individuals did. But
it's
unfortunate. So it's sad. But anyway, that's how that's my background with alien autopsy, and people can believe it if they want. I mean, I know how it was faked, but it was faked for a certain reason to at least let the public know that possibly this went on.
Well, I wish we could see the real footage if, in fact, it does exist. And I know Ray said that he also got the rights to a lot of interviews with Philip Corso, that he's got a lot of footage never seen before of Philip Corso talking about, all this foreign technology and stuff. I would love to see all that footage, whatever package comes out and however way it's going to be presented in the future.
That surprises me. I mean, I lectured with Corso in Brazil and Italy, and I, as far as I know, I did the last interview with him before he basically passed away. But and that interview was only aired in Japan. But as far as Corso, he never ever changed his story.
Right.
He was a very sharp individual and just wanted the truth to be known to the public before he passed away. He was a good man.
Right. Well, it's a shame that he passed before they had that trial against the government to release the information.
Oh yeah, but I can assure you, Corso was telling the truth.
Yeah.
So then we on this timeline here, because what you get is 1997. Corso's book comes out. I tried to warn Corso that day about don't let your story get wrapped up by some studio for $1,000, and all they have to do is just keep renewing it. They want to keep it away from the public knowledge, like they did with the Tesla Society. So I'm talking. This guy comes from behind, and it turns out he's the co-author of the book, and thought I was trying to cut him out of a movie contract with his client here. And it turns out it was Bill Burns, and he takes takes a swing at me.
Wow.
And so these two other researchers and a couple press guys pulled Bill away from me. I said, "This is ridiculous. Who is this guy?" And then I found out it was Bill Burns, who co-authored the book, and he was also a talent agent, and he wanted to make sure he had the contract, with his client for that. He hadn't wrapped it up yet, evidently. So that was my first introduction to Bill Burns, who later put out the UFO Hunters and that type of thing.
Right.
So then we get into that famous case from Zimbabwe with the school children.
Yep.
In the mid 90s, definitely happened. I was not aware until recently with James Fox show Phenomena that there'd been a case similar in '66 in Australia. And then the books popped, just one speaker after another come forward about John their testimony. Yeah. And you got Jacques Vallée, Whitley Strieber, Communion. If Whitley hadn't printed on the book True Story and put the big eyes, Alien, it probably wouldn't have been such a popular book. I had a hard time reading Communion. It was like a melting pot of, like he'd read other people's abduction cases and just blended it all in. But I haven't seen Whitley in a long time, but it's one of those, at least it got people interested in the subject.
Right.
And then they ended up starting to have alien gift shops and stuff in the shopping malls in the 90s. It was really quite a heyday. But then another interesting pilot came out and wrote a book called Sounds from Another Room. Peter Horsley, and it talks about his meeting. He was tight with the King of England, and the King of England had a huge research library in the castle in Buckingham Palace. He was totally into this stuff. So, and this Peter Horsley had access to the king, and so he got invited to this meeting at this woman's house, and he walks in, and there's this strange individual there, and talked incredibly intelligent about the universe and all that, and wanted a meeting with the king. So that there's like about 25 pages in the book about this whole meeting, which I'm sure it was a Pleiadian or something, but it only came out maybe 10 years ago, this book, but it's worth taking a look at. Kind of, once again, somebody that had unusual experience years ago and now felt it was safe to come out with something they were involved in.
Mm-hmm.
So then you got, Gordon Cooper was a good friend of mine. He in 1977, he had that talk at the United Nations admitting that ETs are here. Right. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut that basically trained the other Apollo astronauts. His nickname was the Brain. Had an IQ of 190. I knew him for a long time. Yeah, and I was at the press conference, and you can see it. We talked about this in the last interview, but it's worth mentioning that he called that press conference and looked right in the cameras and said, "The United States government and others have been lying to you. We've been in contact with extraterrestrials for 50 plus years at the time." It was actually closer to 60 back then, but you can see his interview on YouTube, and it was totally ignored by the press the next day.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. I had dinner with him that night when we flew home, and he was hoping that it was worth the gamble of going forward with that statement for him to make, but it totally was ignored. So then you've got, I met with Senator Reid in 1991. He invited me. I'd had him on a flight, and we talked about UFOs because he was friends with Bill Lear, John Lear's father, and Senator Reid at that time he wasn't the powerful senator he became. And he invited me up to the White House the next week to bring all the materials I could that I thought were relevant. And I brought these books up, and we met in his office, and I've got a letter to prove it. And he said, he even brought up, he said, "Jim, they want me to sign off $50 billion in black projects for Area 51. And if you were me, what would you do?" And I said, "Senator," I said, "I want to know what the taxpayers' money was for on something like that." And he says, "They won't tell me." And he had a note taker there taking notes, and then I gave him the books I brought, and one of them was Matrix 2 by Val Valerian, and some other books. And I met with him one other time, and then years later, he was the one who really. He says he wasn't interested in the UFO thing till 2007 when he met with George Knapp and got involved with Robert Bigelow, the billionaire. But he was into the subject way before that, and he was really the one who brought it out to the modern day with the Pentagon report and stuff. And then you got the combination of Lou Elizondo showing up with those videos with Chris Mellon presenting them to the New York Times, and the rest on that. So now you've got the real guy who was a thorn in the side of researchers for many, many years, and now he's going forward with what he knows because his non-disclosure agreement with the military, the Air Force, is allegedly released him to talk, and that's Richard Doty, D-O-T-Y, and having interviews with Dr. Stephen Greer, and now he's out lecturing on what he knows from what's going on at 51 and other stuff. It's pretty interesting. You can see his interviews on YouTube. So then you've got Ancient Alien Show. It's been on 12 years. It's amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's whether they know it or not. But I can assure you that they're production money is coming from the East Coast, and there's kind of and sometimes drawing at straws as far as relating one subject to the next. Trying to, however, it's still interesting, and if they ever come clean on this, I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime with the disclosure, but that the religious issue on this is huge, and that is one of the main. It boils down to number one, religion, and number two, economics of fossil fuel economy compared with they've discovered gravity. And so once you've got that, and they figured out gravity, these entities, how they warp time and stuff, so that there goes the fossil fuel economy, there goes the collapse, allegedly, of the world economies and all that. So that those two are the main issues why this has been kept kind of covered up. I mean, they say what's the worst cover up you can imagine because it keeps leaking out, but the public doesn't know what to believe. So there is a lot of truth to what's out there on these websites and such. But Reed really pushed for it, and strange things are happening with this Richard Doty coming out, and Reed's passed away now, but he definitely knew that we were being visited. So you look at the religious aspects of this, and the greatest extraterrestrial of all is whoever you want to name this person is God. But where's all the proof from that? From a book that's written from stories from 400 years ago. And am I a disbeliever in God? No. But I'm just saying, people say, where's the proof? This whole planet is the proof that there's some kind of higher being that I think created all this. It's all connected through energy, and we've talked about that before, and that's what they've learned from these beings. It's and the most power. What's faster than the speed of light? Thought, and that's how they get here. That's how they get here. So enough of my sermon, but it's a long, unending search for truth. I say unending because I doubt in my lifetime, or maybe yours too, they'll come clean because there's just too much at stake for the people in control of this.
Right. I wonder if, I don't know, it's always a theory, but this push with gas prices going up, everything else, and the Biden administration really want us to go to more green and electric and stuff like that. What's the whole other reason behind that? Is it there's going to be a shortage? Saudi Arabia fields are drying up, or is it that they're really wanting to protect the planet, or is it something else? I don't know. But the fact that you see, these UFOs, they're flying using the electromagnetic field, right? They're using the power of magnetics, time and space. They don't have actual fuel, or is it Bob Lazar said there was some type of isotope or element that they use?
Yeah, element 115, which didn't exist back when Lazar came forward, and now years later, they've now confirmed that 115 does exist.
It's just amazing.
And Lazar's never changed his story. He's another Colonel Corso, never changed his story. So it's just people believe what they want to believe, and it just goes on from there. And it's sad. I look at my library of thousands of books on metaphysics and hundreds of UFO books, and through the years, what that's been put out there, and it's some of it nothing else. It's fascinating. Whether it's all true, it's hard to tell. I've been very fortunate to been in contact with some very unique individuals and some high-level people that really helped me along. When I'm making these statements on your show, they're not done lightly.
No, I understand that. And I know we didn't get into this last episode, but I know you have an interest in this as well as knowledge about this. It's something that I've been fascinated about because some of my friends and I have discussed this. Recently, and years ago, I used to, peruse some of the videos online, and you have to sift through which ones are real, which ones are fake, and a lot of them are fake, CGI and stuff like that. But the ones that really amazed me, and I want to ask you about, there was a couple videos allegedly of leaked footage of some of the astronauts on the moon. And with them being on the moon, I was seeing what looked like black and white footage of certain cities or crystal cities or things flying or things hovering above, look like glass architecture or structures, but then going into these like abandoned type crystal or glass building structures on the moon. I mean, is any of that footage real?
I can't I can't really say one way or the other on that one. I've seen those photos from actually in John Lear's office years ago. I did consult on that show, Aliens on the Dark Side of the Moon, Truth Exposed, and up to I did not have anything to do with that last 12 minutes footage where they Bob Kiviat used some stuff off the internet of where they allegedly brought back a female species from the dark side of the moon. Whether that was true or not, I had nothing to do with that being put into the show. But the original aspect of the show was based on those pictures that from Jet Propulsion Laboratory that somebody had leaked out that were untouched of the structures on the dark side of the moon. And of course, I've obviously not been to the dark side of the moon, but somebody that was a friend of mine was on the dark side of the moon, flew over it, and that was Edgar Mitchell.
Wow.
And all I could say is when I stayed at his house, which he called the museum, because he had all this memorabilia throughout his house of his career in NASA. But I did... He knew his phone was bugged and things like that. But I asked him, did you see anything on the dark side? Or did you find any life or anything like that? And he didn't say anything. He just winked his eye. So, and then later he agreed to be on our show, with Buzz Aldrin, who's a total disbeliever.
Right.
So, but I know a lot of people think we never even went to the moon. I could say 1,000%. Yeah, we went to the moon. And
and when we get into that stuff, about the moon, I mean, I still got friends sending me videos of people, and it looks, I mean, they're old stock footage, and it looks like them setting up sets of the astronauts going through the moon and little models and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my God, it looks like they did fake it. But then again, how do we know they just didn't do these types of practice runs using models and stuff like that to go over and over again repetitions before they actually flew out there? I don't know. But go ahead.
Ironically, once again, strange synchronicity, I ended up sitting on a flight with a gentleman, and he was knighted by the Queen for his accomplishments in film. And he was Stanley Kubrick's cinematographer for every movie. Okay. And I asked him point blank, I said, as we got talking, and I said, there's rumors that you and Stanley produced a fake moon landing for the government of the United States. And I was, not expect him to say anything. And he just kind of chuckled, and he said, well, yes, that was a situation we were involved in, but we never had to use it. So I was surprised. Obviously, they didn't need to fake going to the moon. Yeah, if something had happened where if we'd gone to the moon and they didn't make it, they had this as a backup to make the Russians feel that we made it.
Right.
So here I'm sitting next to the cinematographer that was,
that's amazing.
I mean, this first time I've talked about it, but there's interest.
And that's cool. And then it makes sense for people to say, oh, they only hear the one little part, like, okay, they were involved, so they must have made the film, and that's why it is what it is. But, sometimes people are involved, but they don't carry it all the way through. So I find that story you just shared very interesting. When we look at some of the old photographs and the stuff that was leaked, the conspiracies that come in, the arguments that naysayers would say is like, well, look at this photograph. There's a crop mark that's covered up, so they photoshopped it. They did this, they did that. So you can tell it's fake. And then look, there's multiple light sources. So that is the lighting in the studio and this and that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Or is it the lighting of craft flying above them? And they had to cover and Photoshop some of those things out, as well as the light sources, to not make you realize that there are craft watching them. And that's what I always wondered, is in the reflection of some of the helmets they had on, as well as the lighting of some of the rocks and as well as the capsule, just doesn't match up if you had one light source. It looks like there's multiple light sources. But if it wasn't filmed in a studio and wasn't faked, then there could have been light sources above them that were watching them. And those craft were illuminating that side of the moon or where they were standing. I mean, that's just my theory, is that there could have been craft illuminating it.
Right. And that's quite possible. I mean, I've been fortunate to get to meet, some of the, I met I'm trying to remember his name now. He was the last man to walk on the moon. Now, he wouldn't talk about it, but Edgar Wood and Gordo, and I've met. The original 7 I didn't meet was John Glenn. The astronauts would meet once a year in Los Angeles. They'd get together for dinner and stuff, and they were nice enough to and let me sit in a couple dinners, and they were really interesting people to be picked as the original 7, no question.
Right.
But we know
who's the last person that went to the moon? Do we know anyone that's gone? Last person to go to the moon?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think he's dead now, but there were 12 people that walked on the moon, and I think there's only five still alive. But I'm trying to remember. I met him one time.
Did Russia or China ever land on the moon? Do we know?
No.
Oh, geez.
No, as far as a human, no. No, there's only been 12 humans that have walked on the moon, but they were all very unique individuals.
Well, I think, didn't Philip Corso mention that they kicked us off or something? That we were going to build a base on the moon, but there's already somebody on the moon, so that's why we just didn't go back.
Corso never. I mean, I met him many times because I was able to, talk with him while we were lecturing, and in Brazil we were there for a week, and in Italy we're there for like 4 days. So he and I got to talk. Like I said, he was just so straightforward, straight up guy. It was like he was just letting. Oh, by the way, all this is true. Right. From his book. I know there's been naysayers and read his book, and you look at the evidence, and in a court of law, this would probably put somebody away in prison for life of the proof that's out there, but it never has gotten to that extreme. Right. It'd be nice if people have, tried to get it in the Supreme Court on certain situations that their lives have been destroyed over their beliefs or their testimonies on this subject, but the Supreme Court always turns it down, from what I understand, due to national security issues. Yeah, no, I know my stepdad never really wanted to talk about it publicly, but we had recorded a couple interviews of him talking about it and gave me permission that when he's gone, I can use it. I don't know if I'm going to play it on this episode. I think I'm going to save it for a future episode, and maybe I'll have you on, and we can. I'll send it to you beforehand. You can listen to it once I edit it down, because it's kind of long. Yeah. Well, this stuff is, you just see the play-by-play of how this thing whole played out. Yeah. from the Foo Fighters on down, and then you get into some real conspiracy stuff regarding JFK, and he was calling a press conference after he was going to be in Dallas, and allegedly it was on telling the world about Roswell. And then you've got the Marilyn Monroe FBI wiretap that we actually put on a show that I was consulting on called Encounters. And I said, do not air this this episode, you're going to get the show canceled. And it was a wiretap from the night before, and they'd been waiting over 20 years to get this proof. And this FBI guy released it to somebody, to Kiviat actually, and they went ahead, and I'm sitting there in a bar in LA watching the show come on, and it was the leading story, and shows the wiretap of Marilyn talking to one of her best friends regarding, she was calling a press conference about spaceships, a spaceship that Bobby Kennedy had told her about in Roswell, and this and that. She was going to tell the world. And turns out that other female reporter that was good friends with Marilyn the month before, she was calling a press conference on the same subject, and they all of a sudden she commits suicide. So this stuff's beyond coincidence. When you're dealing with a subject this sensitive, I don't think as time has gone on, unless you've got a absolute proof. And even that general I met with that used to live up my street, and we had that meeting at his house. I said, if I had proof that I could show the world that this metallic piece of metal or something that would prove another world exists, and he said, I can assure you, we haven't been able to duplicate it, but in certain ways, but we back engineered enough where we'd be able to debunk you. And I thought, well,
oh my God.
So that was disappointing, but that doesn't surprise me. If you've heard Richard Doty talk, he says, which I'd heard many times for the last 30 years, the real space program of our country is like 20 years ahead of where the public thinks it is. The NASA is more like a movie set to keep the public off guard of how advanced we've got. And now Doty says I've heard it before that we've been on the moon and Mars for quite a while, and we have crews going throughout the solar system. We can't duplicate, do interstellar like these entities can. Whether it's all true or not, I have no idea, but I've heard this from so many reliable people through the years. I mean, you got to think bits and pieces of the truth are in there.
Oh yeah. What do you think of any of the personnel or your colleagues that you speak with discuss anything about this Space Force that Trump created? I mean, what was the whole purpose of that? Do you know?
I know it's kind of sad that it's been made into a comedy show, but
no, I know.
I think Trump. Every president gets briefed on this subject, but they know they're only going to be in there a maximum of 8 years. And like we talked on your other show, that the two most briefed on this subject would have been Eisenhower, who worked out these agreements with these entities, and then also George Bush Sr., who was the ex-head of the CIA. I think those two would have been the most knowledgeable on this subject. But each president gets briefed. I think Trump was so new into politics and maybe hadn't even heard much about this subject, even though Jesse Ventura was, Trump had ran for president before in the early 90s, and he pulled out. He didn't get any response, not hardly any. But he was good friends with Ventura, who did that show that was had some interesting episodes. Yeah, but it got taken off the air after they did the one on the Pentagon and the 9/11. That was that.
I remember that one.
Yep, and I said they're gonna. I know they've got other episodes they can, and that's going to do them in, and it did. The next week, the show was canceled, just like when they showed the Marilyn Monroe wiretap. The guys came into the studio on Monday after airing it on Friday, and the show was canceled, just like that. I warned them.
So do you believe that, and it's interesting because after I watched that one series, and we talked about this before, the series that was on about the different time periods of alien abductions and everything, and they had the Kennedy thing in there. Was it called Dark Waters or Dark Sun? What was it called? I can't remember.
Dark Skies.
Yeah, Dark Skies. And
right,
I guess yeah, I guess in there, the theory was Kennedy was killed because he was going to release to the public that, UFOs and aliens exist. And the secret government has been keeping this from us because he did mention a month before, a year before, that there's a secret alliance or government that is not for the people, not telling the people stuff. I mean, people can hear that speech on YouTube. There's many different theories and conspiracies of why he was killed. It was the mob. It was Cuba. It was, other stuff. But I mean, I tend to think it was probably because he was going to release to the public that UFOs exist, that there's aliens.
Yeah, that was from my research. That definitely was a big percentage of probably why he was, taken care of. Let's say, but
right,
the other groups you're talking about, that could be part of it too, but it wasn't the whole story. But
okay,
the big part was he allegedly was calling a press conference to tell the world what was going on. Now we get into with Trump and the that Israeli scientist. He was the head of the satellite and space program, and boy, was he quickly ignored. This came out of about a year ago?
Yep.
Do you remember him?
Yep, I do.
And that's so sad. I bought his book. It was published in Israel, and it's only in Hebrew, so I haven't been able to get it, interpreted. But everything he was saying, and the CNBC did an interview with him, and maybe CNN was real quick. I go on the website, and here all it is selling T-shirts and these goofy toys, space toys something, and totally just trying to debunk this amazing scientist. And here he was, the head of the Israeli program, and it was just treated like he was an idiot, which doesn't surprise me. But I think he's still alive. He was about 90 years old, but everything he was saying in those interviews, it was right on the money.
Right.
So, I mean, too bad you couldn't get an interview with him.
No, I know, right?
I think he only speaks Hebrew because the interview was done by some woman that interpreted the interview for her paper in Tel Aviv.
Oh, man. So I speak one language, man, English. I don't know any other languages.
Yeah. But that was a very interesting person to come out, and he brought up Trump. That Trump wanted to tell the world the truth about this, and he was told not to. And so here, the beat goes on. But
and I've wondered if that was when he met with all the military officials and everything, said to call him before the storm and everything. And, he talks about the Space Force, and I'm like, guys, he's not just going to go create something for Space Force. I mean, not that I really care too much for Trump. I don't really care for a lot of the politicians. But the fact of the matter was, I said, he's not just going to create Space Force unless he realizes there's something going on. So is it that he's preparing this for the meetings with the aliens or whatever else is coming? Or is he preparing this for the alleged comet meteor that's coming in 2029? And that, scientists are saying it's going to get so close to the Earth, may even hit the Earth, that he's putting some type of military together in space that could stop it. Who knows?
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, look at what Reagan said in that speech. He's definitely been briefed on this.
Yep.
And talking about a possible hostile, entity out there if they came here and this and that. The whole world would come together.
Unite together. Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
And so I don't know. The one thing these entities have proven, have absolutely proven that they can stop a nuclear launch. So here you got Putin talking World War III and nuclear. And if there was ever a time to save the planet, these entities have demonstrated many times, not just in our country, but others, that they can, take away the launch codes and stop this. So if there was ever a time they were going to show themselves, I think this would be it. But the former Israeli space chief admitted it. He said aliens exist, and Trump knows about it. And the Galactic Federation has been waiting for humans to reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are. And this scientist name's Haim, Haim, Eshed, Eshed, head of the Israeli space technology for 20 years. I mean, this is not some bozo the clown that's on drugs.
Right. And no one took him seriously. I mean, no one gave him any real press or anything. It was just like, okay. I just don't get it. It's like people are like so consumed, I guess, with what's going on in just social media and everything else, but that it's like, I don't know. It's like, hey, UFOs, aliens, you think there'd be a big uproar and everybody like, oh my God, what's going on? But it's like, people don't care, I guess.
And I think the slow process of softening the blow, if they ever do have disclosure, it's almost getting to that point. The millennials definitely, they've been brought up on this stuff and through the internet and the media. So they've got other things they're more concerned about, like making money. And I mean, everybody's so busy just paying their mortgage and getting their kids up in the morning and just surviving, especially now with inflation and what's going on in the world, that they just kind of go ho-hum. I got more important things to think about my own life.
Yep. Totally understood.
And maybe that's the point we've reached where they've just been put out with so much information. And that's the way maybe the government wants to soften the blow on this. And the only show that's really, as far as a religious aspect, is Ancient Aliens. And that's their plausible denial excuse. We didn't keep this from you. You've had that proof out there on this show for years.
Right. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for sharing, all this with us. Is there anything else you can think of you'd like to drop a bomb on us and discuss?
Well, there's other stuff. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but just having a craft fly by your plane is not. I mean, there's so many pilots through the years have seen lights in the sky or craft go by, and who believes them? So that gets almost boring after a while. But for me to have been in this research for so long, and to, just doing that live TV show 5 days a week on this subject for 3.5 years, I'm not saying it took guts. Maybe I was stupid or naive, but I felt mankind had a right to know, and I was very, very fortunate to have done that unique show with somebody that is incredibly unique and has if anybody has the answers, that individual did. And it was, unfortunately, the director of the show didn't believe in it, so there's no shows on the YouTube or anything.
Tough. Yeah, I've dealt with that with directors and producers. They don't believe in the same context, so it gets dumbed down or doesn't fully reach its potential that it could in explaining things to people. But that's the way it is. You got to deal with these people on the outside, the networks and executives that decide what to do with the product.
But I would recommend, as far as some books, I recommended before, as far as shows, that TV show. It was a mini series called
Intruders.
Intruders. Yeah, that was definitely was never put on DVD till only in the last 3 years or so. But I heard Amazon Prime just put it on.
Oh, great!
On there, called Intruders, and you definitely that was so well done. And if you knew who got that greenlit, you'd be very surprised. But that show kind of tells the story as far as and the movie. A friend of mine produced, Paul Davids, did a good job on it. It's not high budget, but both Edgar Mitchell and Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, said this movie is as accurate as it gets. Called Roswell. Starring Martin Sheen and some other actors, but it was done in 1994, I believe. But it's take a look at that one, the movie Roswell, and the book, The Encyclopedia of Extraterrestrial Encounters. It's about 700 pages, but that tells so much of the story. That in The Rainbow Conspiracy by Brad Steiger. Those are, and the Secret History of UFOs by Michael Hesseman. Those I highly recommend.
Okay, yeah, I just wrote these down. All right, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for all your information and your knowledge. And for everybody listening, this is Chris Fleming and Jim. You've been listening to this edition of Spirit Talk.